Good morning to all of you. I am Mahendra Vijaypala, Chairman of ISL Kandurata Chapter. First of all, I welcome all of you for today's event on behalf of the ISL Executive Committee of ISL Kandurata Chapter. In fact, this is one of the series of awareness sessions and evening talks organized by ISL Kandurata Chapter. Aim of this type of talks are to enlighten the engineering fraternity regarding updated engineering issues, as well as enlightening of general issues taking place both locally and globally around us. As you all know, engineers are mostly dealing with materials, machineries, wires, plants, computers, and etc. Because of this, they are normally lack of the knowledge in the changes in and around us. We as Kandurata chapter strongly believe that this type of events immensely help you all to be in par with an updated knowledge on these issues. So with this small introduction, I would like to inform that today we have organized a very timely topic to discuss, that is none other than current economic crisis, its effect on construction industry, and the role of engineers. So we had an internal discussion regarding a resource person to talk on this particular topic. And we finally, our committee member, Engineer Agalepala, was able to find the most deserving character in this regard. He is none other than former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Dear sir, you are very warmly welcome to today's event on behalf of ISL Kandurata Chapter. And also, President of ISL, Engineer IPKU Dharmapala, and President-elect Engineer Arjuna Manampedi, also present for this event. Dear sirs, both of you are also welcome to this event. At the end of this session, we have all allowed you all a time slot for your comments, questions, and clarifications for you all to actively take part in this session. So we needed to moderate this event because of that. So we needed to find out a learned person in this regard. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we have found a gifted moderator, and he is none other than senior lecturer and expert construction management in the field. So this is Dr. Pujitha Disanayaka from Faculty of Engineering, University of Peradeniya. Dear Dr. Pujitha, you are also warmly welcome. Finally, I welcome you all for today's event and deeply respect you all for your interest, eagerness, and enthusiasm on this type of topics as engineers. So, dear Dr. Vijayawardena, the count of participation has faced more than 135. It's very good. Engineers are very enthusiastic on this subject. So even though all are known to the presenter of today, it's customary
Here, Vijaypala. Cannot hear.
I think I'm the secretary, Kandurata Chapter, Panchula Ratnayak. I'm sure Mr. Vijaypala's connection problem. Can you take this session, Dr. Pujitha, to continue this program, please?
Yes.
Panchula, didn't you hear my voice?
No, now we can hear.
Now, yeah.
Early it was disturbed.
Sorry,
Now-
from the very beginning, was it disturbing to you?
No, it was just at the last moment.
Okay. Then I will tell you again. Even though it's Dr. Vijayawardena, it's customary to you all to so I cordially invite Dr. Pujit to introduce the Dr. Vijayawardena, and with that I ask him to go ahead with the proceedings. So have a wonderful and meaningful evening. Thank you all. Thank you all. Over to you, Dr. Pujit.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vijaypala. Can you hear? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce our speaker today, who is going to talk on the topic current economic crisis, its effects on the construction industry, and the role of engineers. I will give a brief introduction about our speaker, Dr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Dr. Vijayawardena served nearly 40 years at the central bank and retired as its deputy governor in the year 2009. He was involved in economic research, monetary policy, financial system stability, provident fund and currency issue management, public debt, rural credit and banking during his service at the central bank. He initiated the setting up of Sri Lanka Accounting and Auditing Standards as the chairman of Sri Lanka Accounting and Auditing Standards Monitoring Board from the year 2000 to 2008. He presently serves as an adjunct faculty at the Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand and provides his services as a visiting lecturer at the University of Sri Jayawardenepura and the Postgraduate Institute of Management in Sri Lanka. He is also the president of the Business Management School, a government-approved non-state sector university in Sri Lanka that offers both undergraduate and postgraduate degrees of UK's Leicester and Northumbria University. Before the start of the presentation, I would like to remind the audience that there will be a Q&A session following the presentation. You may send your questions via the chat facility in Zoom so that we can carry out the session in an orderly manner. Now I would like to invite Dr. Vijayawardena to do his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, Engineer Vijaypala and Engineer Dr. Disanayake, for giving me this opportunity to address the Sri Lanka's the leading technocrats in the industry called the engineers. Even though Engineer Vijaypala mentioned that engineers are not familiar with what is happening around them, that is not true, because the engineers are also made up of blood and flesh and a mind. So as a result, they are much more informed than anyone else in the economy, in the system, about the what is happening around them in Sri Lanka as well as globally. You may know that there is this concept of SMET, science, mathematics, engineering and technology, which should be the foundation of education in all the countries in the world. I have actually modified it to include the creative art. Therefore, it is called science, mathematics, engineering, art and technology. Because without an art, without a mind, without a creative mind, the engineers or any scientist or any medical doctor cannot function in their particular professions. So art is also necessary, and you will be noticing that all the greatest engineering marvels that have been created by engineers have been done by people who had an eye on art as well. So therefore, there is no any necessity for any of the engineers present here to have an inferiority complex that they are not aware of what is happening in Sri Lanka or what is happening around the world. What I will do today is to take you through my presentation for about say 30 minutes, followed by question and answer session where I may be able to answer your specific questions, which will be more, I think, effective and more acceptable to people like you who are also adults, because the difference between a school going child and an adult person is that an adult person he has got a knowledge, he knows many things which I may not know, and also it is actually a sharing of knowledge and experiences rather than my speaking throughout this material presentation. The topic that was given to me was read out by Engineer Vijaypal, but of course I have summarized it to a shorter topic. I will talk about the Sri Lanka's economy and also about the most pressing problem which Sri Lanka's economy is faced today, called its forex crisis, and in the context of the Sri Lanka's downward slide in the Sri Lanka economy and the forex crisis which Sri Lanka economy has faced, I will then talk about the future of engineering industry. So I will speak for about 30 minutes, and after that it will be followed by a question and answer session where we all would be sharing our experiences and knowledge. Therefore, we all would be educating each of us. What I have to tell you is a very bad news. Sri Lanka's economy is at a crossroads today. In fact, it is not a very happy news, because you may have heard that Minister Basil Rajapaksa, when presenting the two bills, the finance bill and the Securities and Exchange Commission bill in Parliament about say 3 days ago, he actually recited a poem which he had, I think, taken out from the Buddha Dharma book written by Reverend Narada, which we used in our school days to learn Buddhism as a part of our curriculum. What he said was that Sri Lankan people are today actually trying to savor honey, while there are three types of dangers there. There is an elephant that might crush them, there is a snake that would bite them, and also there is a thorny bush which might, tear them into pieces. So even with that, he said, Marana Tunak Atiminihet Penikaya, because we are trying to, I think, savor in honey, while there are several disasters that are waiting for us. And these disasters, when we apply to economics, is that we have a slowing down economy. We have a massive catastrophe in our foreign exchange situation. There is a pressure for Sri Lankan rupee to depreciate in the market, and we cannot hold on to anymore. And we have noted the governor of the central bank was changed, and there's a new governor to take it over from next week as immediately as a mitigating measure. And lots of problems are there for us to tackle. So we must be mindful of the fact that we are, in fact, like the man who is facing three types of debts, but still trying to enjoy his meal of honey. Now, this particular economic problem that we have faced is not actually due to the outbreak of this COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic actually hit Sri Lanka's economy only in March 2020. But the economic ailment of Sri Lanka had been there since about, say, 2030, because immediately after the war, end of the war in 2009, there was a sudden boom in Sri Lanka's economy, enabling the economy to grow at a rate of about, say, more than 8% in 2010, 2011, and 2012. Unfortunately, the country could not maintain this high growth rate after 2013. The growth rate started falling, and actually it was a falling growth rate. And when the Yahapala government came to power in 2015, the growth rate had come down to a level of about 3%. But the Yahapala government could not make a reversal of that trend. And what happened was, during the Yahapala government also, the growth rate started falling. And when they left in 2019, the growth rate had fallen to 2.3%. And the immediately after, in the first quarter, before Sri Lanka was hit by COVID-19 pandemic, the first quarter of 2020, the growth rate fell to minus 1.6%. But of course, after the country was hit by COVID-19 pandemic, it was a negative growth, and the negative growth is about 3.6%. Now, many of the engineers may not be familiar with what is meant by this negative economic growth. It is like this. If in 2019, if we have cooked, say, 100 hoppers, in 2020, we have actually cooked only 96.4 hoppers. So what it means is the Sri Lankan population has to now share this. Earlier, it shared 100 hoppers in 2019. Now they have to share only 96.7 hoppers, which means all of us have become poorer by a certain percentage. And most of the rich people might be, I think, eating all the hoppers, and the poor people may not have at least even a single hopper. That is due to the inequity in the income distribution in Sri Lanka, which had been a prominent feature ever since Sri Lanka became independent in 1948. Because the first income distribution survey was done by Central Bank of Sri Lanka in 1953, and continuously after that, every 10-year time period, this survey is conducted. And after 2007, the Department of Census and Statistics took it over from the Central Bank. So we have therefore data for the income distribution in Sri Lanka for the whole period. What it revealed to us is a shocking revelation, because in 1953, about half of the total income.
Excuse me, Dr. Vijayawardena, the audience says they can't hear well. So can you come closer to the mic probably? And
I think, can you hear me?
yeah, I of course can hear. Some are saying they cannot hear properly. You can increase the volume a little bit.
Let me see.
At all.
Can you hear,
Yes,
Mr.
no.
Saramani?
Now you see from the screen also.
The camera went off.
Camera went.
Several saying that they cannot hear. But I was actually keeping the volume very low. Otherwise, the sound was too much for me.
Can you hear me now?
Now little bit good, yeah.
Yeah, because
now it's okay. Now it's okay.
All right.
okay, no? Okay. Then I will restart what I have been telling, because I think we have missed about, say, 2 minutes of presentation. So what I have been telling is that even though engineer Vijaypala said that the engineers are not familiar with what is happening around them in Sri Lanka as well as globally, that is not true, because you belong to an industry where the creativity is the most important thing when it comes to creating marvels for the benefit of the society. So that is why the popular concept that, education should consist of 4 items: SMET, science, mathematics, engineering, and technology. I have actually modified it to include creative art also. So in my view, what we have to teach our students is science, mathematics, engineering, art, and technology. Because without art, we won't be able to create what we have been creating for the world. And the engineers are the people who actually create a new world for us. So my topic today is to talk about the Sri Lanka's economy, its foreign exchange crisis, and also how the engineering industry would have been affected by the growing economic crisis in Sri Lanka. So what I said previously was that this economic crisis was Sri Lanka is at a crossroads today. because our economy is not in a very good shape. It suffers from a multitude of ailments, uh, which actually we had inherited, for about say 5 to 10 years time now, and the economy has come to a very low level during the period from year 2013 to year so far today. And what we have to therefore think of it, that we are actually at the lowest level of our economic performance in our post-independence history. And this is actually not due to the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, because even before the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, Sri Lanka's economy was not in a very good shape. And because, as I told you, we had a very high economic growth immediately after the end of the war in 2009. But after 2013, the growth started sliding down. And as a result, by the time the previous Yahapalana government was ousted in 2019, the economy had actually growth has fallen to 2.3%. And it was actually continued even during 2020 when the new government has taken over. So therefore, we'll have to say that we have to say that it's actually an economy where we are actually facing not a very good prospect for us, but all of us will have to suffer from it. Now, this was actually amply presented by Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa when he presented two bills in Parliament, the Finance Bill and the Securities and Exchange Commission, and he recited a poem which he had copied from the textbook Buddha Dharma, written by Reverend Narada, where he said that all of us Sri Lankans, we are people who are facing three types of death, but still we are savoring a meal of honey, which he said that this is not time for Sri Lankans to savor in honey while Sri Lanka is faced with such a huge problem. So our economic problems are, in fact, if I put them into a simple thing, it's actually we have the slowing economic growth, as I mentioned earlier. The economic growth rate has fallen to the lowest level, and in 2020 we had the growth rate of minus growth rate of 3.6. What it means is, I think for the benefit of the engineers, I will just say, if we had produced, say, 100 coconuts in 2019, we had produced only 96.4 coconuts in year 2020. So as Sri Lankans, we had shared the 100 coconuts in 2019, but in 2020, we had to share only 96.4 coconuts, which means that all of us have become poorer by a certain percentage in year 2020. But of course, this does not mean that the rich people have become poorer and the poor people have become still poorer, because in Sri Lanka, ever since we got independence from the British in 1948, our income distribution had been unequal. And in 1953, the top 20% of Sri Lanka's population had earned nearly half of our total income. And the lowest 20% of our income strata in society, they had earned only 5% of the total income. The balance 45% had been earned by the middle class. Even in 2020, we have the same income distribution. The top 20% is still earning close to half of the total income. And the poor people have become poorer. They are earning now 4%, not the 5%. And it is the middle class which has actually increased its share in the income distribution. So there is a massive income distribution difference in Sri Lanka also. That also you have to keep in mind. Then the other problem that we are facing today is our exports have been stagnating. Even though in dollar terms it has been rising from year after year, but if we take it as a percentage of our gross domestic product, the total output of Sri Lanka, it has been falling from around say 20% in early 2000 to a level of say 12% in year 2020. And as a result, even though the economy has grown, you may be noticing that the growth has come not from the increase in the exports of the country, but from the domestic service activities, mainly trading and other basic activities. Then we have a mounting debt problem because Sri Lanka at the time of independence, our debt levels were very low because the British did not leave us with a very high public debt. The total public debt in 1948 was only 16% of the total GDP, total output. Of that, the external debt was just only 4% of the GDP. But today, in 2020, our total public debt is more than 100% of GDP, and the external debt has increased to about 45% of our GDP. So our situation has become worse. That is because when the country has to repay this debt, specifically the external debt, we have to make a huge sacrifice because we must have dollars in order to make this payment. And dollars have to be earned by producing goods and services which have to be exported to other countries. So since our exports have not been rising at the same growth rate as the national income, the total income of the country, we have a huge problem. And for example, also on top of this, in addition to the government debt, we have the debt contracted by the private sector also, the private companies, private banks. They also have borrowed from abroad. And that is also country debt and national debt. We'll have to repay that also. So according to central bank's latest estimate, within the next 12-month time period, Sri Lanka has to meet an external debt liability amounting to 6.9 billion US dollars, which means it's about close to 7 billion US dollars. So it is a very pathetic situation because we don't have resources to meet those debt repayment obligations. Then our budget has been a very undisciplined budget. That has been the case ever since we got independence. Because during the British period, virtually we had nearly a balanced budget, but after the independence, we had followed this deficit financing. We thought that it is the deficit financing which would help Sri Lanka to promote its economy. So we had been having deficit budgets year after year, and that is why the public debt has increased from near 16% of GDP in 1948 to more than 100% of GDP in year 2020. Our income in the government is falling, and income had been not a very impressive item of the government even in the past. In 2019, with the income reforms that the previous Yapala government had introduced, they were able to increase the government revenue as a percentage of GDP to about 12% of GDP. But what happened was when the new government came to power, they offered an unsolicited tax concession to income taxpayers and the value-added taxpayers, the VAT payers. As a result, in year 2020, the government lost compared to the income generated in year 2019, about say 516 billion Sri Lanka rupees it had lost by way of income. In year 2021, if we assume that the government's income potential is the same 12% of GDP, which it had achieved in year 2019, Sri Lanka government is likely to lose about 600 billion Sri Lanka rupees by way of income. But on top of that, the government expenditure has ballooned, partly due to the COVID-19 related expenses, partly due to the undisciplined budgetary practices actually implemented by the government. That is why the Minister of Finance had to say in Parliament, in public, very loudly, that Sri Lankans were actually savoring a meal of honey, whereas they were facing 3 types of debts. Then we have the
external sector is actually fragile. That is because during the British period, we had a surplus in our trade account. That is our exports were more than the import, and therefore there was a sufficient accumulation of foreign reserves by Sri Lanka. For example, by the time the British left Sri Lanka, they had left us with the largest stock of foreign exchange, which any country in South Asia would have been very envious of. In fact, the total stock of foreign exchange they had left to us was sufficient to finance 17 months of imports in 1948. But today, the foreign exchange level is so poor, and in August 2021, total foreign exchange reserve of Sri Lanka is sufficient only to meet 6 weeks of imports. And if you add the services also, commitments on services also, interest payments and others, our foreign exchange reserves are sufficient to meet only 5 weeks of our requirements. So it's a very pathetic situation. The external sector is very fragile, and as a result, there is a growing pressure for Sri Lanka rupee to depreciate in the market. And that is why the rupee is actually falling. Day by day, it is falling. And eventually what would happen is that Sri Lanka will not be able to hold on to this exchange rate of 203 rupees per US dollar, which the central bank has fixed about 2 days ago. And in the market, there are no dollars available at this particular exchange rate. And what would actually happen is that there is a thriving and flourishing black market where the dollars are available at the price of about, say, 250 to 260 rupees per US dollar. So this is a very pathetic situation, and we have to be mindful of the fact that we are not in the best of our situation with respect to our economic activity. So the outbreak, what happened was the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic has worsened this situation. We were dying, and the death has been actually expedited or hastened by the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. So the scenario for the next few years is also not a very promising scenario. And you don't have to blame me for coming up with this gloomy story. The growth rate will be negative in 2021 and also close to zero in the next 3 years, 22, 23, 24, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also failure of the government to introduce the necessary economic reforms. The central bank, as I told you, cannot hold on to this 203 rupees per US dollar because central bank doesn't have enough foreign exchange to meet the dollar requirements in the market. As I told you, the foreign exchange reserve of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka as at the end of August 2021 amounted only to 3.5 billion US dollars. Out of that 3.5 billion US dollars, there's a gold balance of some 400 billion, which we cannot use in a hurry unless we sell that gold in the market. So therefore, the available usable foreign exchange is about 3.1 billion. But we have to meet the debt obligations also amounting to 7 billion during the next 12-month period. At the same time, every month we have to meet the fuel bill, which comes to about 300 billion US dollars. And we have to import medicine, and we have to import materials for the engineering industry, cement, steel, various building industry requirements. And we have to import medicine. And all these requirements, on top of that, we have to now import rice and various major staple food, because the government had adopted a very insensitive and insane policy of converting Sri Lanka overnight to an organic agriculture sector. And as a result, the agriculture sector has suffered heavily. The paddy sector, the coconut sector, tea sector, rubber sector, vegetables, fruits, and all types of agricultural products, they have suffered heavily, and as a result, we have to import all these things now from outside Sri Lanka. So as a result, we have to now meet that also out of this little foreign exchange that we are available. So what it means is the central bank will not be able to hold on to this 203 rupees per US dollar anymore. It will fall all of a sudden, and when it falls, we also will fall. I can give you a good example from a neighboring country, Myanmar. Myanmar also tried to fix its exchange rate at their currency is called kyat at 6 kyat per US dollar for about say 30 years, 3 decades. But when the country didn't have enough foreign exchange to maintain that exchange rate at that level, there was a flourishing black market that had developed, and with the blessings of the military rulers, the black market actually prospered. So by year 2006, the black market rate was 1,600 kyat per US dollar, whereas the official rate was only 6 kyats per US dollar. And they could not maintain this particular rate. And as a result, year 2012, when they sought support from the IMF to develop a foreign exchange market in Myanmar, they had to allow the exchange rate to fall to the black market level, and they fixed the exchange rate around 850 kyat per US dollar. The very same fate will fall on our central bank also. When the black market rate is at 250 to 260 rupees per US dollar, we will not be able to maintain the current rate of 203 rupees per US dollar. Then this Sri Lanka is unable to borrow from abroad because our credit rating agency, there are 3 main credit rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and also Fitch. All these 3 rating agencies have downgraded Sri Lanka to a very low level. The downgraded credit rating indicates that Sri Lanka has a very high probability of defaulting its future foreign debt. And also they are now threatening to further downgrade, and if they further downgrade, we cannot borrow any money from the international market. Then the budget is in total disarray, and that is why Finance Minister had to admit in Parliament that we are people who are actually savoring a good meal of honey while there are all kinds of threats to us around. And it is our income has fallen due to the government's insane revenue policy. Expenditure has gone up, budget deficit has gone up. So how the government has actually financed, when the income is insufficient, they have got the central bank and commercial banks to print new money. Now there's a very wide public debate that the central bank and the commercial banking sector have been printing money, and the government has been denying it. But the statistics show us during the 19-month period beginning from January 2020 and ending in July 2021, the total money stock of the country has increased by 2,800 billion Sri Lanka rupees, which is a 35% increase. And of that, the government's borrowing has been about, say, 3,200 billion Sri Lanka rupees. So the main culprit of increase in the money stock in Sri Lanka, therefore, has been the government of Sri Lanka. And part of that money had gone out of Sri Lanka, and that is why the money stock has not increased at the same rate as the borrowing of the government, but it has created a huge hole in our external sector, creating further pressure for Sri Lanka rupee to depreciate. And also, we all have to now experience not only economic difficulty, there are shortage of essential goods in the country because we cannot import them anymore because we don't have any foreign exchange. And what it means is that we have to experience a shrinkage of the welfare level of all of us during this particular period. Then government has actually adopted a very short-term palliatives in order to overcome this problem, which are not very effective. One is that it has fixed the exchange rate at 203, and I have told you the government cannot maintain this because of the fall in the foreign reserves, low level of foreign reserves, and also it has introduced the import and exchange controls, which are also not effective. For example, day before yesterday, they had introduced a new type of an import control system by asking the banks to insist on 100% deposit when the importers are importing goods open opening letters of credit to import goods numbering about 623 varieties. What it means is that, and also the central bank had instructed the banks not to grant any loan to those importers. Therefore, in order to maintain this 100% deposit, they have to bring money either from home or borrow from some other alternative source. At the same time, central bank has said another thing, because normally when you make a deposit for importing a product to cover your value of your LC, when the import bill is to be paid by the bank, it is actually set off against the deposit that you have placed with the bank. But in this case, central bank has said, in order to release the deposit, the importer will have to provide evidence that the importer has sent the money through the banking system in Sri Lanka. So what it means is, first you have to meet the import bill by bringing money again from your home, and then only the deposit that you have maintained will be released to you. And this is a very draconian rule. What it means is about this 623 odd products that comes under the restriction. No importer would be able to do it. But of course, when you look at the statistic, it seems that the central bank has closed the stable as the host has bolted, because according to the data during the 7-month time period, in respect of these 623 varieties of products, Sri Lanka has actually spent nearly 80% of what it has spent in 2019, a normal year of imports for the country. What it means is they have already imported the requirement for the next 1 to 1.5 years. And when the prices go up, all these people who have already imported these products would be able to sell them at a higher price and make a huge profit, and therefore they would enjoy the life. So this is a very pathetic situation. Then central bank had gone into temporary borrowing from friendly countries like India, Bangladesh, and China under an arrangement known as SOP facility. The SOP is actually we get dollars from our friendly country, and in exchange we give them rupees. For example, the SOP facility with Bangladesh, which the central bank has entered, they have already got 150 billion US dollars. Sri Lanka would get 150 billion US dollars, and the Sri Lanka has to give the equivalent amount in Sri Lanka rupees, which comes to about, say, 300 billion Sri Lanka rupees to Bangladesh. So during the time the swap arrangement is there, Sri Lanka has the right to use the dollars, and Bangladesh has the right to use the Sri Lanka rupees. And the interest rate on these swaps is normally about, say, 6 months LIBOR, London Interbank Offered Rate, which is the benchmark interest rate in the globe, and plus about, say, another 2%. So presently this LIBOR for 6 months is 0.05%. And when you add another 2%, the interest rate on the swap facility is 2.05%. But there is a hidden cost, because the Bangladesh is able to use the dollars to invest in Sri Lanka government treasury bills and earn 6% per annum. So our total cost is not 2.05. Our total cost is 8%, 8.05, because we have to allow Bangladesh to take that money out, the interest income out. So it's a very high costing, and the high cost also is shown. We have to repay it in bulk when the swap facility comes to an end. For example, you may remember that there was this story about India asking for a previous swap facility of 400 billion US dollars to be repaid immediately in June this year. Sri Lanka had to pay it immediately. It's a bulk payment. But when you borrow from any other source, it's a regular monthly or annual or half-yearly installment. Therefore, it's not a burden for you to find it. Now, this burden is specifically relevant in the case of the swap facility which Sri Lanka is going to have with China. That swap facility is not for dollars. Sri Lanka will get US dollar 1.5 billion equivalent of their currency, renminbi or yuan, and Sri Lanka will have to give the equivalent amount in Sri Lanka rupees to China. So that means we'll be getting 10 billion yuan from China, which we can use during the period of the swap facility, and the China will be able to use this this 3,000 billion worth of Sri Lanka rupees during that period. And it's a huge one. And if China does not extend it further, and if it recalls it immediately, just like India has done, we don't have any dollars to pay them. So we are actually in a very critical situation through this soft facilities. And the government has introduced price controls and rationing, and that is also not a very productive thing. Instead of allowing the prices to increase in the market and reflect the real prices, government has introduced, in fact, price controls, which has actually created the practical shortage and also queues in the market. Then Sri Lanka has that international, because as I told you, we cannot go to international bond markets and borrow money because our credit rating is very low and there is no trust in by the international investors in Sri Lanka. So we have to avoid the international bond market to borrow. So all these factors have led the government to borrow domestically, and the domestic borrowings also have been simply by borrowing from the central bank and commercial bank, where the money stock has increased by 35%, which would mean that we will have inflation in the future at an uncontrollable level. So the solution to seek IMF support, but the top policy leaders of Sri Lanka's government have announced again and again, they have reiterated, including the outgoing governor of the central bank, that they don't want to go to IMF. Even the governor named to take over from him has also announced in public that IMF is not the solution. But in the today's context, IMF is the solution because its interest rates are lower. IMF interest rates are 0.05% plus another 1%, and therefore it is totally tolerable for Sri Lanka. And at the same time, the loans are paid over a period of say 6 to 7 year time period in half-yearly installments. So we don't have this bulk repayment at the end of the loan period. And also it actually forces Sri Lanka to introduce the necessary reforms in order to put Sri Lanka back to long-term economic growth path. So IMF is the solution, and I hope that Sri Lanka government will use this opportunity immediately, because it is already too late for us to get this funding from the IMF, because if we start the negotiations today with IMF, it takes about 6 to 8 months time for us to complete the negotiations. So if we start the negotiations in September 2021, most likely we will get the facility in the middle of 2022. But by that time, Sri Lanka would be actually hitting the ground level because we can have no any foreign exchange in order to meet that request. It is already too late. So what the government would have done is immediately after it came to power in 2019, they would have actually started negotiations with IMF to have a facility from IMF. So the engineering, impact of the engineering industry, now the problem is you are all involved in an industry which depends on the booming economy. If all the people have actually, if they are actually savoring this meal of honey, not in the face of these 3 days, but because there's an economic boom, then the engineering industry also has a demand, because your demand is coming from a booming economy. And as a result, presently, engineering industry have been affected very badly because the essential materials needed for engineering industry cannot be imported from abroad: cement, steel, various bathroom fittings, and also material that is needed for constructing buildings. Those are all not coming into Sri Lanka. They are in short supply. And because of that, prices have escalated, and the engineers are unable to give because of the uncertainty, give an estimate to their customers. So this is one of the biggest problems you are facing. But we'll have to keep in our mind, you will have to now come out for this. And the solution is, one thing is that you may be able to find local alternatives for this material. So research has to be done by engineers right now, immediately, to introduce local raw materials for the engineering industry, except the ones that we have to import, because iron and steel we are not producing in Sri Lanka, we have to import them. We have to get the government to allocate a sufficient amount of foreign exchange allocation for that. But to enable the government to do that, government has to go for an IMF arrangement. So these are the things that we have to insist to government. I mean, it is not the government which is in trouble. It is we as the nation who are in trouble. So that we have to keep in our mind. And one other thing in the medium to long term is for the industry to have a foothold in the rest of the world, because Sri Lanka's engineering industry is at a very high level of development. If we keep pace with the developments taking place in the rest of the world, we would be in a position to get many engineering contracts from the other parts of the world. And that is what should be done by the engineering industry in medium to long term. And it's a must. And for that purpose, I hope the Institute of Engineers Sri Lanka would undertake an immediate research program. Number one, to introduce local alternative raw materials wherever possible. And number two, to take the engineering industry in Sri Lanka to the rest of the world. Those are the two suggestions I can suggest here. We can discuss further these things during the question and answer time. And also I might hear from you, your own views on this thing. Thank you very much. We'll have to
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Vijayawardena, for the interesting and informative presentation. And I'm sure we all agree that today's topic is very relevant and timely considering the current situation in the country. So now it's the Q&A session is open. During your presentation, there were one or two questions. Maybe I can read out. There was one comment. Jai Singh has commented, I believe the items on which the 100% deposit was in respect of non-essential goods which should not have been allowed for import in any case. The people should care for the country and should not try to buy them.
Well,
So
I think it's also a very good opinion, but if you go through the list, you'll find it includes mobile phones, which are actually essential in today's context of, providing this online education to students. Mobile phones, to computers, and so forth. But I will agree that because out of the 623, about 200 odd, more than 200 odd items are relating to apparel and clothing, which can be produced by Sri Lanka. But you may again remember, for us to produce those apparel and clothing, we have to import the textiles from outside Sri Lanka and other materials that are needed to produce this clothes. So the value addition in Sri Lanka in our apparel industry is about, say, 40%. So that we have to keep in our mind, because even if we have to produce them in Sri Lanka, we have to incur foreign exchange costs. Other things are, of course, it's a matter for dispute, because some people might say, because if I don't consume apples, I might say my neighbor should also not consume apples. But of course, we have to remember the fact that if my neighbor makes an honest earning, he, by engaging in the economic activities, and he has a right to consume whatever the product that he wants to consume. And there is no reason for any other authority to decide what he should consume or what he should not consume. So because of this reason, if there's a demand for these products and there is a thing, and the government will not be able to maintain the restriction, and it will actually open opportunities for smuggling of these commodities into Sri Lanka. I'll give you a good example. During 1970-77 also, we followed the same policy, saying that Sri Lankans should not consume so many things which are not necessary in the national interest. But what happened was, there was a flourishing smuggling industry which enabled all Sri Lankans to buy all these goods. For example, I bought my first wristwatch, a Mondia wristwatch, made in Switzerland, even though wristwatch had been prohibited for to be imported to Sri Lanka, because there were smugglers who had brought that wristwatch to Sri Lanka. There was no any restriction on that. So the restrictions does not mean that government has the power to enforce it. You'd have noted it in the case of this turmeric one. Lots of turmeric was coming to Sri Lanka through illegal sources. Some have been traded by the Navy. That's the story we know, but we know lots of other things are also being imported, smuggled, and the government cannot stop it. So what happens is, when you have restricted the importation of these goods in the name of national interest, saying that importation, restricting them is for the benefit of the country, actually, if there's a demand for those products, there will be a supply also. And the suppliers are also very smart people. They know how to get those products back to the market through illegal sources.
Okay, the second question that was in the chat messages, while it is difficult to increase the export income, isn't it better to focus on reducing the imports, particularly the fuel, which costs some $5 billion annually?
Well, that is also a good proposal. But remember, fuel is the lifeline of any modern civilization. For transportation purposes, we need fuel. At the same time, we produce 70% of our electricity by using fuel. If the electricity is not produced, then the water supply will be affected, because water supply depends on the electricity supply. Then our industry will be affected if electricity is not supplied, because fuel is the lifeline of Sri Lanka, and we have no choice in that. What we have to do is we'll have to somehow earn our foreign exchange in order to get the fuel that is needed. But cutting down imports is the same old story, because there is no way for us to cut down our imports further down, because if you take the structure of Sri Lanka's import, the consumer products constitutes only 20% of our total import bill. All others are either intermediate or investment products. So therefore, 80% of the import we cannot curtail without suffering a reduction in the economic growth of the country. So as a result, it is not a feasible thing when it comes to planning.
Dr. Vijayawardena, can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Right. Okay. The next question is, normally what are the IMF conditions for a facility? As per your view, why the government is hesitating for the IMF facility?
Well, of course, the first condition to be imposed by IMF on the government is to be transparent. That is all what we expect our government to do, to be transparent or not to be opaque. To be transparent means they have to, whatever the expenditure that they incur, whatever the revenue that they do, they have to do it in a way that it is being seen by all other people in the country as well as the rest of the world. Second one is they will ask the government to increase its revenue base, and for that purpose they will say you have to expand the tax net in order to get the necessary revenue. Presently, our problem is our income tax. We have only about 200,000 income taxpayers, and out of that 200,000 income taxpayers, balance part about 150,000. The Interior Department will have to make a refund at the end of the year once the tax returns have been presented. But we know, as I told you, 50% of our income is earned by the top 20% of the country. Now, if you take the total product of Sri Lanka, which comes to about 16,000 billion Sri Lanka rupees, 8,000 billion is earned by the top 20%. And if you actually tax them at the 15%, you will be noticing the Sri Lanka government can get at least 1,200 billion by way of income by taxing them. So what is necessary to increase and expand the tax? Then with respect to government expenditure, they will say you will have to allocate your expenditure for productive purposes and not for the type of consumption purposes that we are presently doing. Productive purposes, according to IMF, is increase expenditure on education, health services, and research and development. Now, presently, Sri Lanka's expenditure on education is less than 2%, health services about 1%, research and development for the whole country is about 0.005%. These are the things that they might impose on the government budget. Then with respect to exchange rate and the interest rate, they will say you'll have to open it up. You can't keep the exchange rate down by creating a black market in the economy. Therefore, the exchange rate has to depreciate to its market value. Interest rate will have to be increased in order to provide sufficient incentives for savers to invest and save and provide those savings to the people. And at the same time, the most prominent condition, the proposal that they might make is all the state-owned enterprises will have to run efficiently and viably without being a burden to the taxpayers. Those are the most important reforms that will be suggested. Then I have to warn you here, those are not the conditions to be imposed on Sri Lanka by IMF. Those are actually the conditions which the Sri Lanka government will promise to IMF when it seeks this facility from IMF. It is not the IMF which is actually laying out these conditions. It is the Sri Lanka government which will tell IMF, okay, give us this loan arrangement. We will undertake these reforms in Sri Lanka. So what the IMF does is IMF actually accepts them. So, but you may be noticing that all these things are the which we want our government to do.
Thank you. The next question is, you mean to say that the country's status of economy is status of economically bankruptcy? So, I mean,
well, we have so far not come to that level, because bankruptcy comes in two ways. Number one is if the government is unable to raise any revenue for its purposes by way of taxation, or government is unable to print any more money in order to finance its expenditure. When you reach that level, you are bankrupt. But Sri Lanka has so far not reached that level. As I told you, the government is still able to raise about, say, 9% of GDP by way of its tax revenue. It can still, print more money by keeping inflation rate around, say, 6 to 7%. So therefore, we have not come to that level, and I don't think we will come to a bankruptcy level in the near future. Therefore, as many have said, we are not a bankrupt nation, but we are a nation. We are going through a very difficult period.
The next question is online trading like Forex and binary allowed in Sri Lanka? If so, it is time to stop amid this economic crisis situation. I'm not sure what that question is.
Yeah, I mean, this is about these cryptocurrencies, and I think I will educate you all these things. Because the currencies, we'll have to first accept the fact that what is in legal tender in Sri Lanka is rupees and cents issued by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So using any other means of payment is therefore illegal in terms of Sri Lanka's laws. That we have to keep in our mind. Then these cryptocurrencies are produced by two people. One is by the private sector, but the other one is by the governments themselves. The private sector cryptocurrencies were introduced in 2009. The first currency was Bitcoin. That was introduced in 2009 as a reaction to the failure of the US government to maintain the value of US dollar, because US dollar had been produced by the US government in huge quantities, causing a reduction in its value, as well as leading to the 2007-2008 global financial crisis. So in response to that, a private party had actually written an algorithm, and he had said, we are now producing a new means of payment called Bitcoin. Satoshi Nakamoto, that's the person who had done that. It's an anonymous name. and that was the Bitcoin, and the Bitcoin is actually produced in not it's not covered by the strength of an economy, but it is just generated through a computer system. And the algorithms have permitted people to mine for Bitcoins, and if they get the Bitcoin, that is theirs. And the supply has been limited by reducing the total amount to be mined by the respective miners by half every 2-year time period. So by about say 2024, the global economy world will go into the maximum number of Bitcoins that it can produce. And its price has actually gone up because of these two reasons. Reason number one is it is being used as a speculative currency. And second one is the supply is limited by the production. That is why when it was introduced in 2009, Bitcoin was just 10 US cents in 2009. But today, it had actually about 2 months ago went up to 65,000 US dollars. Now it has come down to 35 to 40 US dollars. And there are dozens of other such cryptocurrencies produced by similar private parties. But none of these cryptocurrencies are backed by an economy. Now, for example, if you get P produced by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, that rupee is backed by the total economy of Sri Lanka, which is actually worth 16 trillion Sri Lanka rupees today. And if you get a US dollar from the US government today, it is backed by an economy as large as 20 trillion US dollars. So there's a backing, but for the cryptocurrency, there's no such backing. Second thing is that the cryptocurrencies are speculative things, and if the bubble bursts, everybody stands to lose. That is another problem. Then, because when the central banks also realize that the cryptocurrency will be a huge threat to their own operation, they also started now producing their own cryptos, which we call the fiat cryptos. Fiat means FIAT. Fiat means by a statute, by law, the government will introduce it. It's called fiat. And now, for example, Bank of England and Swedish central bank called Swedish Riksbank, they have already started working on the introduction of their own fiat currencies. Two countries, Venezuela and Iran, have already introduced their own cryptocurrencies. And several other countries like our own neighbor, India, Reserve Bank of India has appointed a committee to come up with a cryptocurrency for India. And China has introduced crypto renminbi. And Sri Lanka also has appointed the committee in the central bank to look into the possibility of introducing a fiat crypto in Sri Lanka. But we have to remember the fact that crypto is not the solution, because what happens is usually this is a speculative thing. There's no backing by an economy, and if it falls, it falls.
The next question is foreign exchange rate. Now, number one is fixing is bad, as in the case of Myanmar situation. Number two, if you allow it to free float, is allowed, our debt may increase. And number three, middle path. What would you recommend?
Well, it all depends on the particular situation faced by the central bank. As it is, there are dollars in the market at 203. And central bank tried to go to a realistic exchange rate by allowing commercial banks to increase that rate. And you may remember, when commercial banks started buying dollars at around say 215 to 220, dollars were coming into Sri Lanka. So, that was not the actual realistic rate for rupee, and it had to be further, it had to fall further down. But current black market rate is about 250, 260 rupees per US dollar. Probably Sri Lanka would set up its exchange rate around that level, like in Myanmar.
Okay, the next question is what should be the economic policy of the country to come out of this crisis effectively within a considerable short time period?
Yeah, in the very short term, our problem is the lack of foreign exchange. To get the lack of foreign exchange, we have to start immediately working with the IMF and get the IMF facility. And when we get the IMF facility and when we make the announcement that Sri Lanka is going to go to IMF, it itself give confidence among the foreign investors, and they would be sending their foreign exchange to Sri Lanka. So that is how we would be able to survive through the short term. But medium to long term, Sri Lanka has to change its economy from the simple product type of economy to a complex product type of economy. That is where the engineers come into the picture. Because the engineers who would be actually creating new complex products based on high technology, and if we cannot produce those things in Sri Lanka, we have to in the initial period borrow it from the countries which have produced them outside, like Singapore and South Korea and Taiwan, which did in the initial period, and then we have to produce them ourselves. Now, of course, we know we have engineering faculties in almost all the universities in Sri Lanka. We have faculties of technology in most of the universities. And we have very good brain power in those faculties. It's a matter for Sri Lanka to mobilize all these human resources to come up with new products that would be demanded in the world market in the next time period, and which should take Sri Lanka to the rest of the world. So that is what we have to do. We have to convert Sri Lanka's economy from a simple product-based economy to a high-protect product-based economy. And that is what, remember, Vietnam is right now doing. Vietnam was far behind us, but now it is far ahead of us.
Thank you. The next question is, don't you think that the 100% LC margin to facilitate to small group of traders who brought their black money as per the last bill passed in the parliament?
Well, you can't, because now in terms of the circular issued by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, first you have to deposit this 100% margin by bringing money from your home. Then you have to make the payment for the LC through a Sri Lankan bank, and therefore the black money doesn't come into the picture. Previously, of course, yes, but that was not recorded in Sri Lanka in Sri Lanka's statistics. And but presently, it is not the black money; it is the money that is to be routed through the normal channels, normal official channels.
The next question is, what is the issue in Sri Lanka on collecting direct tax?
Direct taxes, actually, as I told you, of the total tax structure, only 10% comes from the direct taxes, 20% and 80% comes from the indirect taxes. And for us to increase the direct tax revenue, we have to expand the tax net. As I told you, we have a huge income which is not taxed by the government of Sri Lanka. As I told you, half the income is earned by top 20% of Sri Lankans, which comes to about, say, 8,000 billion Sri Lanka rupees, and that has to be taxed. And that must be the actually target of the government of Sri Lanka, to tap these people and bring them to a tax net.
So the next question is, what is our expected future economic status and what are the recovery options?
Next thing is that in the short run, we'll have to survive it by going into an arrangement. But in the long run, as I told you, we have to convert Sri Lanka's economy from the simple technology-based economy to a high-tech based economy, and that is where the engineers come into the picture.
The next question is, we have enough options for generation of electricity with indigenous resources. So there should not be a problem of generating the electricity which should fuel the transport too.
Well, I agree with you if you say so. but
Trans-
present level of electricity generation is about 30% through hydro and 70% through thermal oil and coal and thermal oil, and that is the structure. But as you say, we have sunlight throughout the year, and we can the solar energy. We can tap the waves in the sea. We can tap the winds there. We can have wind farms, and all these are possibilities. But they are the engineers will have to come into the picture. Now I'll tell you, because I work in the Asian Institute of Technology. At the Asian Institute of Technology, there are engineers now who have come up with a new solar panel based on nanotechnology. And that solar panel is now, I also have fixed the solar panel to my roof, and that is a huge one. It's about, say, 8 feet by 4. But the one that these engineers at AIT have produced is a solar panel which can produce the same amount of electricity also. It's about, say, 2 by 2. And if now remember, if such a thing comes to the market, it will hit the market immediately. And unfortunately, some of these engineers in the AIT are expatriate Sri Lanka. They were not doing the same thing while they were in Sri Lanka, but at AIT they have all the incentive to do that. So that is what we should do now. Dr. Sanayaka is from the Institute of Engineering from Peradeniya. He may be knowing about it. I mean, lots of human talents are around at the Institute of Peradeniya. And think of that, if you cannot come up with that kind of, because using nanotechnology for producing a solar panel of a smaller size but generating the same amount of electricity will do the trick for Sri Lanka. And I agree with it.
Next comment is, I think, following up the previous one. If the government discourage all imports, what will happen to our apparel products? Because all the raw materials imported from other countries, then it will be lowering our export income.
Well, that is what will happen. As I told you, in order to export, Sri Lanka has to import. There's a minimum level of import that we have to maintain. So the government of Sri Lanka cannot ban all types of imports. And that is why it is necessary for us to earn foreign exchange and allow the import flow to come into Sri Lanka. As I told you, 80% of our total imports are intermediate products and the capital products. So that 80% cannot be touched by the government of Sri Lanka. Only 20% you can cut. Even in the 20%, we have medicine that we cannot cut immediately, but in the long run, we can do that because our pharmaceutical industry is good enough to produce lots of medicine in Sri Lanka. We can do it in the long run. But immediately, very difficult, but gradually, if we start moving towards that direction today, we will be able to realize results within the next 5 to 10 year time.
The next question is, there was a proposal that we should legalize the growing of cannabis, that is ganja, and export it with good control of its use within the country. It is said to be a good foreign exchange earner. What is your opinion?
Yeah. Exactly, and not as a raw material. Remember, those are called essential oils, essential spices. We should actually not legalize the ganja, but even ganja is now being cultivated in Sri Lanka. You have noted that Kerala ganja is being smuggled into Sri Lanka. That is for the consumption purposes. But remember, cannabis is an industrial raw material used for production of medicine, production of various other types of perfumes and so forth. So what we must do is not to cultivate ganja and export them in raw material form, but Sri Lankan scientists will have to come up with formula to convert them into further value additions and export them. It's a good suggestion. It's actually a good suggestion because if we can do that, actually it will open up a new market for Sri Lanka. And also remember, lots of research can be done. Right now, we have to start those research programs. The medicinal use of ganja, the cannabis for that purpose, because now I I head this business management school where we have a school of science, yeah, and we have a degree in BSc in biotechnology. And our students have come up with, wonderful discoveries. They have found in the tea leaves. Now, tea is basically used the bud of the tea for the production of tea, but people simply, ignore the mature tea leaves. They have come up with, they have been able to isolate lots of chemicals, lots of ingredients in the tea leaves, and likewise, research programs can be done for that purpose. Those are very
The next question is why. Yeah. The next question is why central bank failed to inform the general public about and the media in advance before the crisis situation.
Well, that is also a big problem. I mean, we have been, arguing with central bank throughout. Central bank's communication policy has to change today. The reason is people today have access to information, unlike say 20 to 30 years back. They have all means of having information, and information spreads, like wildfire today. So as a result, if a central bank keeps it to itself, the danger is that people create their own stories which should be injurious to the working of the central bank. The central bank has to change its communication policy, inform the members of the public, and prepare the public. Now, you have noted now, that is why I appreciate Basil Rajapaksa for coming up, frankly in parliament, saying that we are in a crisis. That's the first time I have heard the Minister of Finance, admitting a crisis in Sri Lanka. All other ministers of finance and all other politicians in the present government, they were saying that we have no crisis, we have all material, we have all the resources and so forth. The first time he came up with the true story. Central bank also should come up with the same story, because in the present era where people have access to information from diverse sources, there is no any advantage for the central bank to maintain the monopoly power over information in Sri Lanka. That monopoly power has already been broken.
The next question is assuming correct and timely decisions were taken, how long will it take Sri Lanka to come out of the economic crisis?
Well, as it is, I hope the new governor in the central bank, together with the new finance minister, Basil Rajapaksa, they work as a team and do it in correct direction. And if they do so, within the next 2-year time period, we may be able to overcome the present economic malaise in Sri Lanka. But 2 years, we'll have to suffer.
The next question is what will be the relief on economy through borrowing by scrutinizing the main source of income in the long-term basis?
Well, one thing is that borrowing itself is not an evil, because if you use the borrowed funds in productive investments, there you will be getting the highest rate of return for that. As engineers, you are aware of it. Then it's not a question, it's not a problem. Now, Singapore did borrowing, but Singapore had the priority scale, and they used the borrowings in that priority scale, and therefore they were able to not only to repay what they have borrowed, they were able to generate a surplus for the country as well. So as a result, Sri Lanka, instead of borrowing for the consumption purposes that we have done in the past, or we are doing right now, we have to have a priority scale. As I told you, our present priority is to convert Sri Lanka's economy from a simple based technology to complex based technology. So any borrowing or any foreign direct investments which would allow us to improve this area, that has to be encouraged and that has to be sought out. Other than that, getting a loan for this purpose or that purpose, it will not increase our productivity level. We won't help Sri Lanka. So borrowing has to be done on a priority basis. It should be based on a scale of priorities.
Then the next question is extra printing of Sri Lankan rupees. Number one is part of our extra printed LKR stock going to finance our swaps with Bangladesh, China, etc. Number two, despite the so-called modern monetary theory, does printing money disproportionate to production not lead to inevitable inflation? Is that not an indirect tax on the citizens, as people's purchasing power will reduce while the government can spend more?
Exactly,
Like a
and
tax, like a tax.
I agree with both comments, because nobody is aware of the fact that inflation is a tax on people, and that tax falls on the low income people more heavily than the high income people. And why I say you it's a tax now, I will give you just an example. Suppose Central Bank of Sri Lanka prints 5,000 rupee note and uses that 5,000 rupee note to pay salaries to Dr. Dissanayake at the Institute of Peradeniya. Dr. Dissanayake has to sacrifice his real efforts, real labor in order to get that piece of paper for 5,000 rupees. He has to work, say, 10 hours at the university, which is a real labor, real work, and he has to sacrifice that. But the sacrifice to the central bank is only the printing. That sacrifice comes to only 10 rupees per for 5,000 rupee note. So central bank, by spending 10 rupees, produces a piece of paper called 5,000 rupee note, gets from Dr. Dissanayake from Mr. Peradeniya real value equal to say 10 hours of human labor. And why has Dr. Dissanayake has agreed to this unfair exchange? That is because he has been told by the central bank, you go to market with this 5,000 rupee note, you can buy a basket of commodities equal to the 5,000 rupee note. So that promise is there. And that is why he has accepted this unfair exchange. But when he goes to the market, he finds his neighbor also has a 5,000 rupee note, that other neighbor also has 5,000 rupee, everybody has a 5,000 rupee note. When all are trying to say buy the same commodity, the prices will go up. For example, suppose at the beginning, the central bank has promised, the government has promised Dr. Dissanayake, with this 5,000 rupee note, you can buy, say, 1 kilogram of milk food. But when his neighbors are also in the 5,000 rupee note with them, and if they are asking for the same product, prices will go up to say 10,000 rupees. So he will be able to buy only half a kilogram. So the lost kilogram, half a kilogram, is a tax he has paid to the government. So that is called inflation tax. And that tax is squarely falling on the low income people rather than high income people. And that's the danger.
The next question is immediate solution that I fear for a while or short period. The engineers find foreign employment and send foreign currency to adjust and balance the current account.
Engineers, actually not only engineers,
Go abroad.
They will go abroad. Yeah, I mean, wherever it is possible, local talented labor is now migrating. We cannot stop it because Sri Lanka doesn't have prospects for them to work. And as I told you, when you go to AIT, most of the professors there are former academics of the Institute of Peradeniya and University of Morat. That is the funny thing. And they have migrated. They are working there and they are doing their own research. And finally, they come up with lots of new products and things. So Sri Lankan engineers also, if they can get the possibility of working abroad, they can gain experience, earn foreign exchange, and return to Sri Lanka one day. This is exactly what has happened in the case of India and also in Vietnam. People who had migrated earlier are returning to India and Vietnam, and they have created an economic miracle in both countries. The Silicon Valley in Bangalore has been created by the expatriate Indians. Similarly, the Vietnamese people who fled the country in boats, who are known as the boat people sometime back, are returning with money, experience, and business acumen, and they are taking that country forward today.
The next question is, how do you find funds to build new power plants, especially with heavy front-loading projects like solar? I think the best option is the optimization of existing resources or go for low-cost power generation options. It will still a blessing to our exports as well, isn't it?
Yeah, in fact, it cannot be done overnight. We'll have to, it's actually, it should be a plan, medium to long-term plan of producing the required power for Sri Lanka, power and energy for Sri Lanka. In that plan, initially, you will have to utilize the low-cost methods of producing power, but our final goal should be to convert Sri Lanka to a completely renewable energy source. That is what should be done in the long run. I agree with you.
There are many questions. I don't know till what time we can continue. In the last year, the bank interest rates for fixed deposits and interest rates for loans were reduced significantly. Did it have any impact on the current crisis?
Well,
Interest rate.
it had an impact. Reason is that when you have a lower interest rate, you actually promote consumption. When you promote consumption, since Sri Lankans are consuming largely imported products, that consumption is leaked out of Sri Lanka, and we are actually importing products. And that is why we are running into a foreign exchange crisis in Sri Lanka. The second one is there are certain anomalies in our banking sector, and if you look at the final accounts which they have published for the first half year of 2021, I have examined them. Most of the banks have made huge profits. National Savings Bank 10 billion, Bank of Ceylon 11 billion, first half year. And when I looked at the total of that in 2019, their interest income and the interest cost was about 72% of the interest income. What it means is when they earn 100 rupees, they had paid 73 to savers. But here 2021, the first half of 2021, in the case of Bank of Ceylon, the interest cost is only 50% of the total interest income. That means when they earn 100 rupees, they have paid savers only 50 rupees. So the banks have become richer, but the savers have become poorer. So which is an anomaly. And who is the saver who would be accepting this particular fate for a long period of time? So he will not save, and he will either go into these cryptocurrencies like pyramid schemes and use his money. All kinds of things will be happening which are totally unproductive for Sri Lanka.
Okay. The next question is, at this rate, is there a hope Sri Lanka can recover from the current crisis? If so, by when? I think someone asked this.
Yeah, I think
what are the 5 important steps? Yeah, we have it.
We actually answered this,
yes,
Dr. Kisana.
Yeah, you have answered. Yeah. I'm just going through the sequence of the questions. The next one is, at this rate, is there a hope? Okay, that was answered.
We have a hope.
Please, can I get the recording? Okay, no. Okay, next question. Can you differentiate between the situation in 1977 crisis when introducing open economy as a solution and the present crisis? And can you suggest a suitable solution for internal crisis while going to IMF as you suggested to solve the dollar crisis?
Well, during 1977 to 70 to 77 also, we had a similar situation. We did have foreign exchange. We had to ration, we had to introduce price controls. We had to ration the distribution of commodities, and there were lots of queues and waiting lists, and people were poorer. There was a heavy increase in the poverty level in Sri Lanka. And in 1977, the open economy was introduced against that background. But what happened was, after the open economy, we have failed to introduce the necessary economic reforms. For example, there is this important index being compiled by the World Bank and the World Economic Forum about the ease of doing business in Sri Lanka and the competitiveness index in Sri Lanka. In both indices, Sri Lanka is ranked very low, despite the fact that we had introduced the open economy in 1977. That is because most of the things that we do in Sri Lanka are actually done in the most traditional and outdated way. That's the reason. And as a result, it is actually a cost for the businesses to do their thing. One good example I can tell you is that every year when I look at the ease of doing business index, one item they are highlighting is the cost of electricity connection in Sri Lanka for a small and medium enterprise, which they have said it would take more than 100 days to get the connection, plus another say 5 million Sri Lanka rupees to get the connection. Whereas in Singapore it is 2 days time, even in India 7 days, and the cost in Singapore is a fraction of what our SMEs will have to introduce. So, but year after year, the world ease of doing business of the World Bank has highlighted this. None of the successive governments have tried to tackle this. Those are the things that we have to eliminate. But because when you eliminate all these difficulties for businesses to start businesses, the final result would be that private sector will take it over and they will actually create a economic boom for Sri Lanka. What had happened is it's a government sector through printing of money which had tried to create this economic boom, which has not been effective so far.
Okay, there is another question. I think it's some kind of follow-up. Did you imply that Sri Lanka government may offer conditions acceptable to IMF but will not comply?
Yeah, that is
You have-
exactly, I mean, it's a good question because we had got this IMF arrangement 16 times since 1965. Of them, we have gone through the entire program only 5 or 6 occasions. Whereas 11 occasions halfway through, we had actually disappointed the IMF and we have not completed it. So that is why the IMF programs have failed in Sri Lanka. Even the extended fund facility obtained by the previous Hapalana government in 2016, the last tranche could not be drawn by Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka failed to fulfill its obligations. So what Sri Lanka government normally does is it tries to get the IMF certificate, get the initial tranches, installment, and then give it up. And who is actually suffering is the members of the public, citizens. That is true.
Okay, the next question is, I think probably we may have to wind up. There are a few more questions. The swaps you mentioned with Bangladesh, for example, you gave, has the right to invest whatever they collect from Sri Lanka. It seems
Yes.
you implied to invest in US dollars since you mentioned the high SDA rate. I can't understand that. Can that not be excluded or controlled in the swap agreement?
No. This is like this. A swap is, suppose you have an alms giving at home. You have plates, but you don't have spoons. What you do is you go to your neighbor, give part of your plates to him, and get spoons from him so that you can have the alms giving. But during the period of this swap, you have the right to use the spoons that you have borrowed from your neighbor. At the same time, neighbor also has the right to use the plates that you have given. In the same way, what happens is when we go into a currency swap, we get US dollars which are ours. We can spend it for whatever the purpose. And we give them Sri Lanka rupees that is theirs. They can either use those Sri Lanka rupees to meet the expenses of the embassy in Sri Lanka, or they can invest them in Sri Lanka government treasury bills, which is very safe investment and earn 6% per annum. Or they can do whatever they want. But at the end of the period, if they invest them in Sri Lanka rupees, Sri Lanka treasury bonds, it is easy for them to return the Sri Lanka rupees they have borrowed from us. What happens to us is, since the dollars we have borrowed from them, we have used them up to say import anything from India or repay our debt. At the end of the period, when we want to reverse the swap facility, we have to borrow dollars from outside or use our dollars from our reserve. So that is the risk that Sri Lanka is facing.
Okay. There's another question. As you have said, this problem grew over many years, but isn't it a problem of policies and lack of governance, which is the real case, real
Exactly,
cause?
Exactly, I agree with you. And when you go to IMF, the very first thing that we have to promise to them is that we will have a good governance system in Sri Lanka. So that is the advantage of getting an IMF loan rather than getting a loan from China. But China doesn't insist that one. China will insist that we'll have to give our real assets to them. But IMF will insist Sri Lanka government will have to have a good governance system. Exactly. Yes.
So another question is, what can we do as a citizen?
As citizens, number one, remember, if we work hard and smart as engineers, we will produce new things for Sri Lanka and we will be able to make a value addition to Sri Lanka. That's number two, we'll have to educate ourselves continuously. Right? We have to update now this type of lecture program that you are conducting for your engineer fraternity. It's a very good thing because you are actually keeping your knowledge updated. And also, I find all these engineers have been very critical engineers. They are not exactly, accepted whatever I have said, told them blind. They have questioned back to me, and as a result, it's a must. We have to develop this, critical thinking in ourselves. We have to produce more, work smart, and at the same time, we have to face the eventual austerity that we have to take forward. And as I think one of the ministers today I saw on the TV, he said that if you are eating 3 meals, be prepared to eat 2 meals now. That is what is marked on the wall for Sri Lankans.
There are 2 or 3 questions. Yeah, shall we end with the last question? I can see so many propaganda in social media which are mainly based on some business mafias. Example, protests for coal power plant in 2004 to 2017, then for liquefied natural gas projects 2020-21. Some parties always try to make a conflict which heavily affect on our electricity prices, ultimately create a high product cost, especially tea apparel. So it is a disadvantage when competing with other countries. So it's talking about the cost of electricity.
Exactly. Not only cost of, he is saying that we have failed to communicate clearly to our citizens of the country. Whenever you see Dr. Disanayake, some interested parties coming up with a story, you will have seen all our TV channels holding a microphone in front of you, and that fellow speaks, and that is given a high priority. But no one tries to, refute him. No one tries to explain the true facts. Now, in the case of the electricity production, the necessity for us to go for this low-cost electricity production as an intermediate measure has to be communicated very clearly to the citizens of the country. But at the same time, we have to tell them we are doing this right now because we have no any other option. We cannot live without electricity. But in the future, we are going to go for this renewable energy, and that will be our final goal. Because the communication system in Sri Lanka is so weak, it has become possible for anyone to produce any fake news and get that news accepted by the majority of the people of the country. There again, as I told you, now you ask me what is the role of the citizen, I should be critical, as you have done. And you have to critically examine whatever the news that is being thrown through your throats by other people. Because remember, always those other people have a self-interest to throw that news through your throat because he stands to gain. So we have to understand.
I think we have exceeded the maximum time limit given. So we are now. I think we'll end the Q&A session. So thank you very much for Dr. Vijayawardena for clarifying the doubts. So there were many doubts coming up. So that was good actually. So now I will hand over the session to Mr. Panchula Ratnayaka, Secretary ISL Kandurata Chapter, to give the vote of thanks. Over to you, Panchula.
Thank you very much, Mr. Disanak and all others.
Thank you, Dr. Pojita. Yeah, good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. Now we have come to the end of what a valuable, fantastic time we required session. More than 165 participants participated from the beginning of this session to end of this program. That gives a clear evidence that how success this program and how interest our engineers for this program as well. No, really, this subject is much more important today than the previous day. The current economic crisis, the effects on the construction industry, and the role of engineers. Really, we were discussed in the Kandurata chapter for what are the topics for the evening talks based on the ongoing burning issues. Finally, we found this topic. Considering this, the importance of this title, the committee decided to expose this program for the entire ISL members, and also the committee unanimously proposed your name to conduct this program to fulfill our requirement as well. So, the veteran economist, Dr. W. Vijayawardena, you fulfilled our requirement with covering all our requirements. You clearly explain the present nature of present problem, the solutions, and the role of engineers clearly better than the matured engineer for this subject. And also you took more time to explain our problems than your presentation to explain clearly the problems, ongoing issues, and clarifications. Thank you so much, sir, for your dedication. We made a short request via our email and the letter, considering the purview and situation of the country, but your dedication is highly appreciated, and thanks for your contributions. And also our moderator, Dr. Pujita Disanak, also a busy person today. We had more than 50 questions today, and you handle everything in a nice way to drive this game in a perfect way. Our moderator, thank you, Dr. Pujita Disanak, for your valuable contribution today. And also we must appreciate our subcommittee for this organizing this evening talks in the Kandurata chapter, Dr. Chaminda Disanak and Engineer Agalepal and the committee. You have arranged everything in a nice way. You coordinated all these resource person and the moderator and all the tools arranged correctly and timely, and you arranged the game in a nice way, very nice way. And also I want to appreciate the president-elect and the officials of the ISL. All the way you are giving the correct and necessary assistance throughout our sessions, and you are behind us for all the activities. And thank you so much, sir, for your valuable contribution. And also we must appreciate our president and the executive committee, ISL Kandurata chapter. All the way you are working as a team, and your leadership drive this goal to a success way. And also at last, without any your participants, without you, there's no any successful program today. With your actively participation, your questions, your clarifications, drive this goal in a correct way. At the end, thank you so much, and wishing you a health and safe life. Thank you so much, and good night. Thank you again. Bye.
Well done, Mr. Vijayapala. Well done. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Great event.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vijayawardena. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.